April 2025, my GP does my blood test. HbA1c, the blood sugar marker, has dropped from 47 to 40, pre-diabetes range to optimal. He seemed pleased. I was pleased. But I was still waking up at 3 in the morning, still tired by 2 in the afternoon, still not sleeping properly. The blood work said things were improving. My body wasn't getting the message. And that gap between when the blood markers moved and when the sleep actually repaired, that gap's what this video is about. I'm Neil, 13 years of NHS blood tests, and I've been correlating sleep quality against blood sugar markers for the last 13 months. Professor Matthew Walker, the sleep neuroscientist, talks about metabolic damage disrupting sleep architecture, and that's exactly what I found when I finally laid my data out. The HbA1c improved first. The sleep came back roughly 6 months later, not at the same time after. Today, I'm going to walk you through that timeline, what the blood test showed and what the sleep data showed, and why I think the sequence matters more than most sleep advice ever acknowledges. I'll be honest with you, I'm still working on my sleep. December 2025, my GP wrote a letter saying my health markers were optimal, normal. I still have nights I don't sleep well. What I've learned is that the blood sugar conversation and the sleep conversation are actually the same conversation. Most people are just having them in separate rooms with separate doctors. In the next 15 minutes, I'm going to show you the 13-month correlation data, the mechanism that explains why metabolic repair takes longer to reach the sleep cycle than it reaches your blood work, and what I changed that eventually produced 57 nights rated 9 or 10 out of 10 in 2025. No sleeping pills, no melatonin, nothing like that. Just the underlying problem finally shifting. There's a piece of research I keep coming back to. Peter Attia, physician, serious about data, cites work from Irv Van Korter's group at the University of Chicago, confirmed across 9 separate randomised control trials. Here's what they found. Sleep deprivation of just 4 to 5 hours creates insulin resistance equivalent to early type 2 diabetes. Not after months, within days. Sit with that for a second. 4 to 5 hours sleep, the kind that a lot of people run on as a matter of routine, produces the same metabolic state as a chronic, diagnosable condition within days of it starting. Benjamin Bickman, biochemist, probably the clearest communicator working on insulin right now, puts a number on it. 1 week of insufficient sleep makes the body approximately 30% more insulin resistant. And in a recent study, just 2 days of 50% sleep reduction was enough to make otherwise healthy men insulin resistant. 2 days. So here's the question I sat with when I started looking at my own data. Which came first? Was my blood sugar elevated because I was sleeping poorly, or was I sleeping poorly because my blood sugar was elevated? Turns out it's both, which is the most inconvenient possible answer, but it's also the honest one. When you're sleep deprived, cortisol rises. Cortisol mobilises glucose. That's its job. It's a stress hormone. It's preparing your body for effort. So blood glucose goes up. At the same time, the cells that would normally respond to insulin start becoming less sensitive. The combination of elevated cortisol and disrupted hormonal rhythms reduces how well insulin can do its job. The result, blood sugar is higher than it should be. Insulin has to work harder to manage it, and the whole system runs under increased load. Sophie Bostock, sleep scientist, genuinely one of the clearest thinkers on this, describes it as a full physiological stress cascade. Cortisol up, blood pressure up, blood glucose mobilised, and if that cascade runs night after night, it compounds into immune dysregulation, inflammation, and cardiovascular risk. Not theoretical risk, measured risk. Deep sleep is when the council bin lorry does its rounds in your brain. All day, your brain accumulates rubbish, dead cells, metabolic waste, the beta amyloid proteins associated with Alzheimer's. Deep sleep is when the lorry drives through, clears the lot, hoses the streets down. Missed deep sleep, 5-hour nights, fragmented sleep, too much alcohol before bed, and the rubbish piles up, week after week, year after year. Deep sleep isn't optional, it's waste collection, and if the metabolic environment is disrupted, blood sugar unstable overnight, cortisol elevated, the lorry can't do its route properly. The bins don't get emptied. Everything backs up. Now here's the part that surprised me, and I think it's the part most sleep advice misses entirely. Dr. Michael Mosley, GP trained, actually ran the study. Research from a sleep lab at Cornell University. They controlled what participants ate and measured the sleep it produced. Diet rich in fibre and protein, measurable, more deep sleep. Fell asleep faster. Diet rich in sugars and simple carbs, lighter, more disrupted sleep, more fragmented throughout the night. The relationship doesn't just run from sleep to blood sugar, it runs the other way too. What you eat shapes the architecture of your sleep, which means if your blood sugar has been dysregulated for years, as mine had, HbA1c climbing from 38 in 2015 to 47 in 2022, the sleep architecture has been deteriorating the whole time. And fixing the blood sugar isn't an instant fix for the sleep, because the clock also needs resetting. The tissues need time. The hormonal rhythms that govern when you fall asleep, when you drop into deep sleep, when cortisol starts rising in the morning. Those patterns don't snap back the moment your HbA1c comes down. That's the lag. That's what happened to me. And here's why that matters. Whether or not you've had a diagnosis, this mechanism, blood sugar instability, degrading sleep quality, runs for years before it shows up on a blood test. If you're in your late 30s or 40s, feeling unrested, waking at odd hours, never quite getting the sleep you used to, the mechanism may have been running in the background for a long time. Understanding the sequence matters at that stage, not just after a GP flags a number. There's a model that explains something I found confusing about my own experience. Your sleep is governed by two completely separate systems working simultaneously. The first is like an hourglass. It fills with sand the longer you're awake. A chemical called adenosine accumulating, building sleep pressure. When enough sand has accumulated, you fall asleep. The second system is like a pendulum. Your circadian rhythm, swinging independently, controlling when those thresholds rise and fall across the 24-hour day. Both have to align for sleep to arrive easily. This is why you can be completely exhausted and still not sleep. The hourglass is full, the sleep pressure is there, but the pendulum is at the wrong point in its swing. The circadian system is out of sync, or the timing's wrong, or something upstream, stress, cortisol, blood sugar instability, is interfering with the signal. You have all the ingredients for sleep, and you still can't get there. What I experienced for months was essentially this. The hourglass was full, I was tired, but the pendulum had been knocked off its rhythm by years of metabolic disruption, and it took time, considerably more time than I expected, for it to find its natural cadence again. Your body has an anticipatory function that most people never think about. An hour before your alarm goes off, your muscles are already warming up. Genes are switching on, metabolic rate rising, blood pressure preparing to support upright activity. Your body knows you're going to wake up, and it's getting ready before you do, like a factory, bringing the machines up to temperature before the shift starts. This warm-up requires the factory to know when the shift starts, which means it requires consistent timing, consistent wake time, consistent signals. If your circadian system has been disrupted, which metabolic dysfunction tends to do, because insulin, cortisol and blood glucose are all circadian regulated, the factory doesn't know when to start warming up. You get out of bed into a body that isn't ready. Cold start every morning, and cold starts compound. The most common sleep advice I see is this: just get 8 hours, as if duration is the variable that matters. Brenda Davis, registered dietitian, solid clinical background, makes a point that I think is underappreciated for anyone whose blood sugar is unstable. Both high and low blood glucose can disrupt sleep directly. High, overnight glucose disrupts sleep architecture. Low blood glucose in the small hours, it triggers cortisol release, which wakes you up. It's a vicious cycle. Poor blood glucose control worsens sleep, and poor sleep worsens blood glucose control. Duration doesn't fix that cycle. Fixing the metabolic environment is what fixes the cycle, and that takes longer than most sleep advice lets on. I want to be straight about where my personal data is strongest and weakest here. The blood sugar data is solid. 13 years of NHS tests. The HbA1c trajectory from 38 in 2015 up to 47 in 22. Back down to 40 by January 25 and 37 by April 25. That's documented. That's not N=1 guesswork. That's clinical records. The sleep quality data is more subjective. I've been scoring my sleep nightly, 10-point scale, and the data set for 2025 runs to over 300 entries. But a self-reported sleep score is still a self-reported sleep score. I'm not wearing an Oura ring. I'm not in a sleep lab. So I'll tell you what the data shows and what I think it reflects. But I'll be honest, that this part carries more uncertainty than the blood work. Day 9 of my extended fast in spring 24, I was exhausted. 4.5 hours sleep, lying there for what felt like most of the night. Unsure if I was actually asleep, emotionally steady. I'd learned to separate mental state from physical state by that point, but physically, I was running on fumes. That was the pattern for months. Not dramatic insomnia, not lying there for 3 hours staring at the ceiling, just consistently poor quality sleep, fragmented, unrefreshing, the kind where you wake up feeling like you haven't really been away. What I didn't understand at the time was that my blood sugar was probably still unstable enough overnight to be interfering with my sleep architecture. The daytime blood markers were improving. Whatever was happening in the small hours, the cortisol responses, the glucose fluctuations, that was still running. HbA1c 47, October 22. Climbing, sleep scoring 5, 6 out of 10 most nights. The odd 7, the odd 4. Nothing consistently good. HbA1c 40, January 25, back in normal range. I thought the sleep would follow quickly. It didn't. The blood sugar number improved first. The sleep came back roughly 6 months later. Slower than I expected. Slower than I felt was fair. Honestly, there were weeks in that period where I was eating better than I had in years, fasting regularly, blood tests looking good for the first time in a decade, and I was still waking at 3 in the morning. The mechanism I'd broken had to repair on its own timeline, not mine. The end point, I tracked 57 nights, rated 9 or 10 out of 10 across the full year. No sleeping pills, no melatonin, no alcohol as a sleep aid. Never used that anyway. Just the underlying metabolic environment finally stable enough for the circadian system to do what it's supposed to do. That number means something to me. Not because 57 perfect nights is some remarkable achievement, it isn't, but because the contrast with 2022 and 23 is so stark that I know something genuinely shifted. Not overnight, not in a month, but it shifted. And this matters beyond my specific situation. The mechanism that was running in my data, blood sugar instability, degrading sleep quality over years, doesn't announce itself with a diagnosis. It runs quietly. The data was showing the pattern years before a GP would have flagged it as a clinical problem. 13 years of NHS blood tests, the actual numbers, the GP conversations, what changed and what didn't. If you want to follow someone who documents this properly rather than just talks about it, that's what this channel is. Subscribe if that's useful to you. If I was starting this from scratch, knowing what the data showed, there are 3 things that I've done differently. Not a program, not a schedule, just the order I'd have prioritised things. The eating window comes first, not the sleep hygiene. Every piece of sleep advice I read told me to focus on the sleep itself. Bedroom temperature, blackout blinds, screen time. And look, it matters, but it's downstream of the metabolic environment. If your blood sugar is unstable overnight, no amount of blackout blinds fixes the cortisol spike at 3 in the morning. The eating window is the upstream variable. Finishing eating by 7 in the evening, or earlier if you can manage it, gives you overnight blood glucose profile a chance to stabilise before your sleep architecture has to run. The research backs this up. Blood glucose spikes late in the evening directly disrupt deep sleep. The earlier you close the window, the longer the system has to settle before you're trying to sleep. This doesn't mean eating perfectly. It means timing matters as much as what. Morning light. First thing, before anything else. The circadian anticipatory system, the factory warm-up I described, runs off light signals above everything else. Bright light in the morning, particularly within the first 30 minutes of waking, tells the suprachiasmatic nucleus, your master clock, that this is when the day starts. That signal cascades down to every organ in your body and sets the timing for the next 24 hours. 10 to 20 minutes outside, ideally without sunglasses, within half an hour of waking, and some days that is hard. But the mornings I do it, the evenings are consistently better. Track the sleep, but track the trend, not the night. One bad night means very little. One bad month tells you something. What I found useful was averaging weekly, not obsessing over a single night score, but noticing whether the 4-week average was moving in the right direction. Because the lag I described, the delay between metabolic improvement and sleep improvement, means you won't see the signal in individual nights. You'll see it in the quarterly trend. If I was starting today, the single thing I'd test first is finishing eating at least 3 hours before bed, consistently, for 4 weeks, not fasting, not counting anything, just moving my last meal earlier. Track your sleep quality, however you want, even just a 1 to 10 note on your phone each morning. 4 weeks, see if the trend moves. That's it. One variable, enough time to see if it does anything. If it does, you've got data. If it doesn't, you've at least ruled something out. If you're on medication that affects blood sugar, particularly diabetes medication, please speak to your GP before changing your eating pattern significantly. Fasting and time-restricted eating affect how medication works, and dosing can need adjusting. This is the kind of thing where a conversation with your GP before you start is advisable. I've built a sleep quality tracker that runs alongside the other tracking sheets, logs nightly scores, shows weekly averages, flags the trend over time. That's what I use to identify the lag pattern in my own data. It's free and the link's in the description. Please remember, this is educational content, it's not medical advice. If you're on medication, particularly anything that affects blood sugar or blood pressure, speak to your GP before changing your eating patterns or fasting approach. If sleep issues are significantly affecting your daily function, that's a conversation for your GP too. There are clinical interventions that can help, and I'm not in a position to advise on those. All of what I've described here is my own documented experience. One person, 13 years of NHS blood tests. Make of that what you will. New video Monday, Wednesday and Friday. I'll see you then.